So, good evening, everyone. I'm Rachel Tanucci from the Bloomfield Public Library, and we are so excited tonight to celebrate Black History Month with all of you with Jaeme McDonald. He's a musician and educator and has done quite a few programs for us in the past, and they do often tend to be about music history and all the different genres. But Jaeme's also something of a film buff, and so he's going to get to show us that expertise tonight and some of his own experiences growing up and what he appreciated in film and television. And he's going to be focusing specifically on the Black perspective in film and television beyond the white gaze. So, Jaeme, we're so excited to have you here tonight to discuss this topic, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Rachel. Hi, everybody. How are you? For those people who I might have seen before at a program, hello again. If I don't know you, my name is Jaeme McDonald. I am like Rachel said, a musician and educator and a massive movie buff. Like I love thinking about movies and talking about movies and noticing movies and television and all the influences that go into what we view. Being a Black man, of course, that experience has been very different over me. You know, wanting to seek out images in a positive light for me as an influence is a huge part of my life and a huge part of my upbringing. So the conversation for this presentation kind of builds from there, but it has allowed me to do a bit more research and find out where things are coming from and where influences and movements come from and how we progress from one thing to the next, just like history does. So this is the Black perspective in film and television beyond the white gaze. So before we get started, I just want to put a disclaimer up. Through the building of this presentation, of course, we're going to run across some imagery that may be a little offensive or uncomfortable for some folks. I've tried my best to kind of put it within context and not just flash something on the screen. So it will tie to something that we are talking about again, because this is about moving beyond the white gaze. So participant discretion is advised. Please, if you see something, just know that that is going to be within context. So as we get started, the title was Beyond the White Gaze. I'd like to define the white gaze, just so we know exactly where we're coming from. So what is the white gaze? Stories about BIPOC characters in both mainstream film and TV have an obstructed, distorted, or blurred, or even blinded view. The white gaze is the assumption that the default observer or viewer is coming from the perspective of someone who identifies as white, or that people of color sometimes feel the need to take into account or placate the white observer's reaction. This was a term that was actually popularized by Toni Morrison, the critically acclaimed writer. When describing how it operates, Morrison said that the idea is that Black lives have no meaning and no depth without the white gaze. In the simplest terms, the white gaze can be conceptualized as the assumed white reader or viewer. When writers craft stories, the assumed white and often cisgender heterosexual male audience, excuse me, I lost my place. When writers craft stories, the assumed white and often cisgender heterosexual male audience that they're writing for, and two, is the white gaze in action. The white gaze can be expanded to mean the ways in which whiteness dominates how we think and operate within society. Being encouraged to adhere to white-centered norms and standards is one of the ways that white gaze operates. So I examine that as well as I'm going through my life and this presentation. So we are going to move into part one. This is a three-part presentation, actually 4 parts. So early Hollywood and Black images. Okay. As cinema was birthed over 100 years ago, one of the first films, and you might have heard of this before, was called Birth of a Nation, based upon a book called The Klansman, directed by D.W. Griffith. On the evening of March 21st, 1915, President Woodrow Wilson attended a special screening at the White House of The Birth of a Nation, a film directed by D.W. Griffith, and based upon the book Klansman, a novel written by Wilson's good friend Thomas Dixon. The film presented a distorted portrait of the South after the Civil War, glorifying the Ku Klux Klan and demonizing blacks. It falsified the period of Reconstruction by presenting blacks as dominating Southern whites, almost all of whom are noble in this film. And the Klan was portrayed as the South's savior from this alleged tyranny. Not only was his portrayal untrue, it was the opposite of what actually happened. This film has been cited as the spark that rejuvenated the Ku Klux Klan and gave rise to further implementation of Jim Crow laws. It happened to be a blockbuster hit in the US and will continue to influence the portrayal of black people in cinema for decades. We're going to come back to Birth of a Nation towards the end. And we move into sound and color and picture. Gone with the Wind. When black characters were depicted in films, aside from being cast as dangerous savages, like the Tarzan movies, blacks in film were most often portrayed as subservient to whites at every turn. One most famous is the movie Gone with the Wind and actress Hattie McDaniel. Playing the role of Mammy, McDaniel received the Best Supporting Actress Oscar, the first for a black actor. Despite being recognized by the Motion Picture Academy, the role of the maid was a stereotypical one. McDaniel won the award, but on the night of the ceremony had to sit in the back of the back of the auditorium at a segregated table. Her career would never benefit from her win. She starred in over 300 films, but was only credited for 83. McDaniel actually got her start with her sister in minstrel shows. Anyone know what a minstrel show is? Anyone? A little show of hands if you know. Okay. But her minstrel shows with her sister were actually critical of racial segregation and discrimination. Okay. And if you happen to not know what minstrel shows are, I have a quick definition. Minstrel shows were created in the early 1800s as entertainment for both white and black audiences, and depicted blacks as lazy, illiterate, ignorant, prone to thievery, and jovially aloof. More than often, black characters were portrayed by white actors in blackface, speaking, singing, and dancing in affected broken English accents and slang. These images made their way into Hollywood films, sometimes performed by mainstream actors such as Mickey Rooney, Al Jolson, Shirley Temple, and even Judy Garland. And before we move into my next segment, I do want to take a quick mention. There was a radio program and a TV show in the 30s, 40s, 50s called Amos and Andy that you might have heard of. Amos and Andy was actually blackface on radio. It was white actors pretending to be black. There was another actor, Stephen Fetchit. We're not really going to mention those because I want to start moving away from this depiction because it is moving beyond the white gaze because it was happening at this time. So quick picture. So we get the reference of minstrel imagery and stereotyping. And we're going to move straight into what are called race films. Race films were films made by black directors and starring all black casts starting at the end of World War I. These films were made to counter the effect of Birth of a Nation and depicted black life in a positive light. Between 1915 and 1948, more than 150 independent film companies made all-black cast movies aimed specifically at black audiences. These films enabled black performers, such as actors Paul Robeson and Charles Gilpin, to eschew the Hollywood stereotypes and stock characters in favor of better defined characters that often lived and worked within black communities. These films would frequently focus on the tensions within these communities and cover social issues such as education and economic mobility. Unfortunately, many of these films have been lost to decay. There's probably about maybe 15 that still exist that haven't decayed over time that you can actually watch in museums. Some of these you can actually find on YouTube if you'd like to see them. And one of the most prominent directors of these race films was Oscar Micheaux. He was the first major black filmmaker, directing over 44 of these films. He depicted contemporary black life and complex characters in his films, countering the negative on-screen portrayal of blacks at the time. His first film was called The Homesteader and was based upon a book that he wrote called The Conquest. The film tells a story loosely based on his life of a homesteader and the failure of his marriage. He produced and directed the film himself after the original producers refused to let him partake in the production process. The film was hailed for its more realistic portrayal of black and white characters. His second film, Within Our Gates, released in 1920, counters the Birth of a Nation movie that I just mentioned by portraying contemporary racial situations in the United States during the early 20th century. The years of Jim Crow, the revival of the Ku Klux Klan, the great migration of blacks to cities of the North and Midwest, and the emergence of what was deemed the new Negro, a more outspoken advocacy of dignity and a refusal to submit quietly to the practices and laws of Jim Crow racial segregation. Controversial at the time for these themes, but later lauded for its handling of complex race issues, Michaud is hailed as one of the greatest black filmmakers of all time. He died at age 67 in 1951. And we're moving right along here. Any questions?
Yes, we do have a question.
Yes.
Did white audiences view the race films, or was the audience restricted to black audiences?
The audiences, these movies were basically played in black areas and black cinemas. So it was not marketed, nor did it cater to white audiences of the time. Did I answer the question?
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Part 2, civil rights and independent filmmakers. We're going to sweep right from the 1960s to the 1990s. And our first stop is one of my favorites as a child, is Sidney Poitier. Yay, give it up for Sidney Poitier. As black people began to demand the right to be treated with respect and dignity through work, protest, and music, filmmakers would also follow through filmmakers would also follow through the civil rights movement. The rejection of stereotypical portrayals began to grow into the 1960s. Sidney Poitier was a force to be reckoned with. From age 16, Sidney was determined to be an actor and successfully pursued an acting career on Broadway before starring in several pivotal films depicting the black and white divide. To Sir with Love, In the Heat of the Night, Paris Blues, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. The latter was one of the rare films at the time to depict an interracial romance in a positive light, as interracial marriage had been illegal in most states of the United States. It was still legal in 17 states, mostly Southern, until June 12, 1967, 6 months before Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was released. Sidney was the first black actor to win the Academy Award for Best Actor for his role in Lilies of the Field in 1963. But he stopped taking roles for about a year, since all the roles he was offered was for him to play a soft-spoken appeaser. He was conflicted by the fact that the award was an honor, but was this truly the industry congratulating itself or looking at him? Poitier received praise for his roles, but would soon find criticism for playing over-idealized, desexualized characters without faults. He wanted more roles, but he felt he needed to set an example with his characters. The balancing act of placating multiple audiences is quite common with black actors in what is deemed mainstream cinema. How can you accurately play a role without crossing a line into stereotype while simultaneously appealing to each audience? We're going to come back to that later. Sidney Poitier would go on to direct multiple features into the 1990s, and he also started a production company, First Artists, so actors could create and develop movie projects on their own. He received an honorary Oscar in 2001 for his contributions to cinema, and he would spend his career declining projects and roles that were based in negative or offensive stereotypes. Sidney Poitier passed away in 2022, I believe. All right. I've got one next segment, still in the 60s. I want to give a special mention to Rod Serling. Anyone know Rod Serling? Yeah. Oh, Sunny. Yeah, clapping. Yes. We all know Rod Serling. I was a big fan of Night Gallery, by the way, growing up as a kid, because I was up way too late. Twilight Zone's amazing, but I like Night Gallery. But I want to mention Rod Serling because he actually got his start in a very, very different way. So Rod Serling, at the time, was a 30-year-old writer in Hollywood and a believer in television's power and the fight for social justice. Came across the story of a young black boy named Emmett Till. Emmett, just 15 years of age, was brutally murdered in Mississippi by white supremacists and Serling decided to write a teleplay around the topic of racism that led to Till's murder. But his bosses, the censors and advertisers, who were afraid of blowback and retaliation from white Southern viewers, forced Serling to retool his approach. His approach was a show called The Twilight Zone, an anthology that tackled society's ills, such as prejudice, war, and bigotry, and spoke truth to the era. If he had his way, we would have had a TV show about Emmett Till right after it happened. So special mention to Rod Serling. All right, moving into the latter part of the 60s, we're going to move to these two filmmakers, Melvin Van Peebles and Gordon Parks Jr., and a genre called Blaxploitation. Blaxploitation is a genre that featured black protagonists in charge of their destinies and were quite often violent and graphic, as well as satirical. These films, which often included drug dealing, violence, and easy sex, were at first hits but soon would come under scrutiny for their stereotypical images and pervasiveness in the black community. The first director, to our left, Melvin Van Peebles, was an American actor, director, writer, and composer. His first Hollywood film was called Watermelon Man, and it was a satire about racial bigotry, where the main character, a white man, wakes up suddenly as a black man and has to deal with the ramifications. His second feature and his biggest movie, his most known movie to date, is called Sweet Sweetwater's Badass Song. And it would spark this blaxploitation genre. Gordon Parks, to our right, was a photographer, actually the son of a photographer and a photographer himself, and director, most famous for the movie Shaft and Superfly, both movies with strong black male action stars that were comparable to their white counterparts. These films were a chance for the movie industry to cater to black audiences, as they found many of the movie houses empty due to white flight from urban areas. The studios found new audiences and began to create more films in the genre. But due to oversaturation and over-the-top stereotypical performances by the end of the 70s, the genre lost steam by the 1980s. We're going to come back to blaxploitation in just a little bit. So here are some of their films. You can see some of the movie posters. We have Sweet Sweetback. We have Shaft. I'm sure some of you have seen Shaft or a parody of Shaft at some point. But at the time it came out, these images didn't exist. And you had Sidney Poitier, who was more docile. These were aggressive black male roles that appealed to a wide berth of black audiences. And then we have Superfly. Special mention to Pam Grier, Foxy Brown, movies like Cleopatra Jones. But by the time we got to the later part of the 70s, it started to fall into parody with movies like Blackula, Car Wash, which is a blaxploitation movie. It's a comedy, but it's a blaxploitation movie. The Dynamite Brothers and other movies. By the time that it got to the late 70s, the audience had abandoned the films. The NAACP actually spoke out on it. And they were kind of angry at the images because they were glorifying pimps and glorifying violence and these virile men, and the women were all objectified. So the movies lost favor by the 1980s. Moving forward, we're going to move into Sidney Lumet's The Wiz. Produced by Motown Records and Universal Pictures, it is a retelling of The Wizard of Oz with an all-black cast. Music was orchestrated by Quincy Jones, and the studio thought it would be a surefire hit. But it wasn't. It was a box office bomb, but since then has become a cult classic with Black audiences and Oz fans alike. Any Oz fans in the room? Yes. Very nice. If you haven't seen it, please watch it. It's a fabulous, fantastical tale. The ability to tell the same story with Black faces does not hinder the movie's appeal. Instead, it universalizes the content and even expands its magical realism without falling deep into caricatures or stereotypes. Moving forward into the 1980s, I like to call this the normalization of Black family culture. Because again, we're moving from Sidney Poitier and the stoic Black characters to Blaxploitation and the cartoonish violence, moving into the normalization, or what we deem quotations, normalization of Black family culture.
Hey,
As a result of,
Jaeme,
yes,
sorry, before you start,
go ahead.
do you know who portrayed the white man in Watermelon Man before it
Oh,
changed over to the other actor?
yes, I do. I don't have the actor's name, but I can tell you that it was a Black actor in whiteface. You'll have to look up the trailer.
Okay, I'll look it up.
But yeah, that gets a little deeper again, because we don't want to go too much into the white case. But yes, it is actually a Black actor in whiteface. Okay, so as a result of the images portrayed in the 70s through Blaxploitation and the miniseries Roots, many Black creators were eager to escape those images of Black trauma. The 1980s brought a new image to the audience, cultivated through the idea that Blacks can be more than just poor people, speaking slang and jiving. The first Black sitcom to break that barrier was The Jeffersons, which was about a self-made millionaire and his wife and children, and their lives through a comic lens. Next to follow after The Jeffersons was The Cosby Show, Flip Wilson, which is actually the picture all the way to the left. Anyone remember Flip Wilson, the comedian? Yeah, Sonny, yes. Flip Wilson actually had a family sitcom in the 1980s called Charlie and Company. His wife was played by Gladys Knight, and it also featured a soap opera star and a young Julia White, aka Steve Urkel. Show didn't last that long. But it was nice to see because Cosby Show came out, and then Charlie and Company, and then started a cavalcade of amazing shows. 227 was another one. Amen, Family Matters, and The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, where the family unit was the show's true star. Other sitcoms of the time often featured characters stereotyped from the white lens, shows like Good Times and Sanford and Son, or, and we'll talk about this for just a moment, the white savior trope of shows like Different Strokes and Webster. These particular shows featured Black families with positive and caring relationships, stable homes, and lucrative careers. The latter part of the 80s would also feature a show called A Different World, which was not a family sitcom, but was a sitcom based at the fictional HBCU, Historically Black College, Hillman College, and gave a view into Black college life for America. All right, moving forward. So that is the acceptance that Black people can actually have successful families, can have successful careers and images.
Jaeme, would you mind just explaining the white savior trope and the examples that
Yes.
you provided?
Okay, the white savior trope, and I'll go back to that for a second, is the idea that the Black person needs to be saved by the white person. by the white character. If you think of movies like Green Book, if you think of Dances with Wolves, where the story is actually turned on its head and becomes about the white person coming in to either take in the culture, it's Pocahontas. If you can think of Pocahontas, it's the idea that the white character is the center that's going to save everything. Cool?
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. All right, moving into Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy, pretty powerful at the time. Had a lot of success due to Another 48 Hours and Saturday Night Live. Well, Eddie Murphy took that and made his own production company titled Eddie Murphy Productions, where he produced Beverly Hills Cop, the movie Raw, Coming to America, a host of other movies. And the one I want to talk about just for a moment is the movie Boomerang. Boomerang is of note for me because all the main characters in the movie are white collar professionals, successful white collar professionals. And the movie exists as a drama and comedy without the baggage of racial commentary. You can watch this movie and it's real, exists. You don't have to question anything. Everyone in the movie is just working their jobs and they're living their lives and they're going through their drama. They just simply exist in their world. It's accepted, and it's an amazing movie to see. So Eddie, for those 10 years, actually had a great production company putting out a lot of really, really positive movies with different images. He has his own money. It just made Rachel laugh. So, all right. Moving on, Eddie sparked another movement. We have Mr. Robert Townsend and his hit movie Hollywood Shuffle. Robert Townsend was a stand-up comedian who found himself not being able to find the roles that he wanted within Hollywood. So he actually took that experience and made it into a spoof of Hollywood and of Blaxploitation culture. Because at the time, all the casting agents wanted to cast stereotypical images. So he made Hollywood Shuffle. He financed it on his credit cards. And his gamble paid off due to its brash spoof of the genre and poignant social and racial commentary. It's a wonderful watch. Please watch it if you haven't seen it. So we have Robert Townsend, which then sparked our next stop, Mr. Keenen Ivory Wayans. Keenen Ivory Wayans actually was featured in the movie Hollywood Shuffle and took his turn. He was also a stand-up comedian from New York. And he took his turn and made a movie called I'm Gonna Get You Sucker, which is a complete rip and parody of every blaxploitation, every stereotype from the 70s into the 80s and making that commentary. And it was a huge success, leading him to be able to create the show In Living Color, which was a multiracial cast, same spoof. They were not, let's see, how should I describe this? They were not precious about being able to parody anything they felt like, whether it was black culture or white culture, or things they just deemed hilarious at the time. Keenen Ivory Wayans would also go on to helm the Scary Movie franchise, which is a spoof of the Scream movies and the horror genre. I think there's 6 of them. Anybody know? I think there's 6 scary movies. I've only seen 2. But the idea that a black director can actually make these movies and make commentary and spoofs and it just be a movie you go see and it's accepted is a pretty powerful thing.
Yes, 6 movies.
Thank you. I thought I had that right. Okay. All right, moving on. And then we're moving into the 1990s because now we're starting to see more images. You know, you've got the family images, you've got these spoofs of blaxploitation culture. But there's not really anyone making any commentary about current, modern 1990s Black life in urban areas. So we have 4 directors. We have Spike Lee and his seminal movie, Do the Right Thing. We have John Singleton, who worked for Spike Lee as his camera guy, who made Boys in the Hood. We have Ernest Dickerson, who was also a Spike Lee graduate, who made the movie Juice. And we have the Hughes brothers, who made Menace to Society. All of these movies were the edgy mirror to Blaxploitation. And these filmmakers tell grittier stories of black male struggles within urban life in the 1990s. They are ultra violent, but also they are ultra raw and ultra real, especially Do the Right Thing, which is about race relations in Brooklyn. And these movies try to balance their stereotypical images because they are actually criticized for some of those stereotypes being over the top, along with the racial commentary and social commentary, but from a black perspective. So when you're in the movie, you're seeing what people are going through. So it's not just stereotypes. If you watch the trailer, then obviously you're going to feel that way. But if you watch the movie, you'll actually see the struggles that people go through on film. Moving into the 90s, I like to call this little stop Black Women Lead, because at the same time this is all happening, there's a lot of stories that are being told featuring Black women. We have Set It Off, which is like the female version of Juice. Basically, the story is that there are four women who are down on their luck and decide to rob a bank. And we have Waiting to Exhale, which is a romantic comedy about four women going through their various stages of romance or divorce in real life. We have Soul Food, which is about matriarchs of a large family, and the TV show Living Single, which was a sitcom, which was the precursor to Friends. It actually inspired the show Friends, about six young black professionals living in an apartment building and their hijinks and experiences. But that show was anchored by Queen Latifah, Kim Fields, Erica Alexander, and Kim Coles. An amazing, amazing watch. Okay. There's a couple images coming up here that might make people a little uncomfortable, but we have to talk about this because this is going to bring us back to the minstrel shows. Spike Lee, in the year 2000, made a movie called Bamboozled. Has anyone seen this? Talking about white gaze and beyond the white gaze and the black gaze. Has anyone seen this movie? You can just raise your hand really quick if you have. Okay. If you have not seen this movie, it stars Damon Wayans, brother of Keenen Ivory Wayans, we just discussed. And Damon Wayans plays a TV executive who has white bosses and he hates working for them. So he decides to make a show so stereotypical, so on the nose, so racist that he would get fired. But it backfires on him and becomes a hit with white audiences. So he has to keep making the show. It is really uncomfortable to watch this movie. It's really crazy. It's very intense. There's a lot of images of the minstrel shows and blackface. There's actually black characters, black actors in blackface in the movie. And it makes a lot of commentary about what we're seeing on the screen. And it's a deep dive into what the white gaze can do to black actors. So please, if you haven't seen Bamboozled, please watch it. It really, if you're having any questions about what that white gaze means and what it feels like to be that other person, Bamboozled is a way in. The conflict that Damon Wayans goes through as the main character is very real and very raw with people who work within the industry. And the actors, Savion Glover and Tommy Davidson, also of In Living Color, are incredible in the movie. And after that movie, things start to change in Hollywood. You know, Spike is making his amazing movies. There's a lot of black directors out. There's a lot of black content out there of varying styles, types, and commentary. So I like to call this section the Millennium and Ownership of the Black Image. And my first stop there is the network BET, which stands for Black Entertainment Television, where you can see a lot of the stuff that we're talking about right now. BET, it was the first and sole, actually not the sole, because there's a lot now, is the first black-owned and Black-centered network, which programming, music, and everything is primarily for Black audiences, but anyone can watch it. So, but BET has also been criticized for the fact that it perpetuates some of the stereotypical images in these movies and shows that we've seen, that we've talked about. So to this day, there's still a lot of commentary from the NAACP and others that BET is a little irresponsible with its imagery, but within that, it's about that balance, just like Sidney Poitier. It's about the balance of what they're putting out there. One of the things they are putting out there, however, is Black romance in cinemas, which is something that we really didn't see that much coming up in the 70s and 80s. Movie like Superfly is not very romantic, but there were film directors that decided to make Black romance movies like Love and Basketball, Brown Sugar, Love Jones, and a host of others, where we watch stories with Black actors, but the stories are not Black trauma. They're not about race. They're just about love, relationships, situations. Anyone seen any of these movies? And we're into the 2000s now. And so we have, and we're going to make it stop here on Mr. Dave Chappelle. Any Dave Chappelle fans here? I'm kind of like this. But one of the reasons I was actually drawn to him was his commentary on racial stereotypes and the send-up of racial stereotypes. But, quick story, Dave Chappelle had his successful show. Within 2 seasons, he started to feel a little bit like the reason people were watching the show was the stereotypes, was the caricatures. There's a character he has in the center picture named Tyrone Biggums, and Tyrone Biggums he's a drug addict, he's a crackhead. And by the 2nd season, Dave was kind of wondering, well, what are people laughing at? Are they laughing at the parody of people with drug issues, or are they laughing at this semi kind of blackface thing? The 3rd picture, actually, he did a sketch called the Pixie Sketch, where he plays a variety of racial stereotypes of every creed. But the one particular, he played a minstrel show character. And while he was filming it, there was someone in the back laughing. There was a white production assistant laughing. And he could not tell the difference between whether or not they were laughing at the parody or were they laughing because they thought minstralism was funny. It made him quit the show. And that's why the show ended. The show ended because of that very sketch. That picture right there, because you can't find it anywhere. That picture right there was him as a minstrel character. But that was enough for him to go, you know what? I think what I'm doing is irresponsible. I'm leaving the show. Because I'm not going to play into those stereotypes. So if you ever wondered why Dave Chappelle left the show, that's the reason why. Okay. In the 2000s, we also move into media ownership. This is not a film or TV, but these are 2 very powerful people that shape what Black audiences watch. Oprah Winfrey and Tyler Perry. Tyler Perry has his own movie studio, and Oprah Winfrey, of course, the celebrated Oprah Winfrey, gets to determine what Black images come out, what doesn't come out, what's responsible, what isn't, and the commentary for that. Tyler Perry is making for a very specific audience, but his movies are very lauded as true to the community, at least most of them. There's a couple people don't like it. But these 2 are definitely, they're media conglomerate owners. And then we move into some other directors. If you've ever seen any of these movies, they are incredible. These are 3 Black male directors. Antoine Fuqua and his movie Training Day was Oscar winning for Denzel Washington. Ryan Coogler, director of Black Panther, his first movie Fruitvale Station, a wonderful watch from the perspective of this young Black man who actually, oh my God, I just drew a blank. I'm sorry. Fruitvale Station, the story of a young man who's actually brutally murdered at a train stop, and Moonlight, which I'm not going to get into, but you should definitely watch that as well. That is Barry Jenkins, who's an amazing director as well. But these are all varying stories. Training Day is a cop drama. Fruitvale Station is a biography of a young man that was killed way too soon. And Moonlight is kind of a moody coming of age film. And now that brings us to the modern age. Black celebration and sober reality. The beautiful part of what's happening right now is that there's so many media outlets and so much content, especially with streaming and Instagram and Facebook and the whole internet, that you're seeing a wealth of images. And the images are real to true life, or true to real life. That's one of the beautiful things. We have movies like Black Panther, which are celebrating Black superheroes. But we also have sober realities. There was a show that came out on HBO several years ago called Watchmen. Has anyone heard of this? It's based upon a comic book series. Rachel raises her hand. Yes. Watchmen was actually a comic book in the 1990s. And it's a superhero genre, but it's very dark. It's very much like none of the superheroes are really super, but they have actually retold it from the lens of the Tulsa Massacre. There's a white supremacist group that's actually going around and trying to take over again. And during the course of the show, there is an episode where they actually have a lynching, very much like Birth of a Nation. But the lynching is actually from the perspective of the person being hung. And it's a harrowing watch. I wasn't going to show the clip here, but if you get the chance to move beyond the white gaze and actually see what Black people see, you should watch this clip and watch the whole show. It's an amazing show. It's sci-fi, it's superhero, but there's one particular scene where they actually recreate what that person goes through being hung. And it is harrowing, but it's a must watch. So those are the realities. The things that we get to live with right now as Black people in America is we get to look at all these images. We get to celebrate. We get to look at history. We get to really have a sense of what reality is for us. And the future is bright. And for the future, I'm going to feature these three directors and writers. So the first is Misha Green. Misha Green actually was the showrunner and producer of a show called Lovecraft Country, which retells H.P. Lovecraft stories with a Black cast. And they cover everything from sundown towns to the Black experience in 1950s America. And we have Ava DuVernay, who made a movie called 13. She also made Wrinkle in Time and is an incredible director as well, making a lot of poignant films. And we have Nia DaCosta, who most recently was the director of Marvel's movie, The Marvels. So the future is very bright. The future is bright, moving beyond the white gaze and getting to be able to tell stories from Black perspectives that are not just about race, but can be about race, but be about life. And I guess that's the point. I guess the point is that Black filmmakers and Black actors and Black directors just want to be able to tell stories about life for any audience. So that's how we move beyond the white gaze.